Now let's take our direction and go towards attention and performance and really think about the connection to it. And we're going to start by really trying to identify what attention is. And so attention is this idea of something stimuli takes in and creates a action in the mind where it's a clear and vivid form, right? And so there's something that you are consciously or actually focused on. And then you can see these kind of activities in the brain in a certain type of stimuli, but it takes the precedence of a clear and vivid form. And then, so it implies that you have some sort of withdrawal from something else to effectively deal with something, right? So if one stimuli draws your attention, then you have to move from another action or focus and directly focalize or concentrate on that. And really this is thought of as a consciousness, and you are consciously focusing, and you can see this by the electrical activity in the brain towards something independently. So this idea of consciousness, right, is what are we aware of at a given time, and what are we more importantly, what are we paying attention to at a given time? And there are many ways to measure this, but most importantly, you're looking at the brain activity. We know there's regions in the brain that are responsible for motor, but as well as some other sensory inputs. And so part of it is focusing on specific stimuli that are causing our attention. And we can see this through functional MRIs or some magnetic stimuli. And those are some areas where we can focus and really identify those locations of the brain that are active. Another concept that is really connected with attention is this idea of you're giving effort, or it's an arousal state, or you're expending some sort of effort to focus on or to pay attention to achieve that task. And this will come into play with as we do some multitasking review of studies in this class, but there's also some physiological measures that indicate your ability to focus or of effort or arousal, right? And so a lot of times we think of effort in the physical realm of increased heart rate or skin resistance to current or basal dilation or pupil dilation, right? So these are all different physiological components that we have associated with a certain arousal state or a certain effort given. Arousal state, you can see oftentimes when people give presentations or they're on stage, and I just got to witness one of these not too long ago, where the individual starts to sweat and palpate, or they start to really shiver and shake, and their heart rate starts to begin. This individual that I'm thinking of has a resting heart rate below 50, and during the day or 2.5 days leading up, they couldn't get their resting heart rate below 65. And so for this individual, their heart rate was this idea of a certain arousal state. For them, that was a little bit of a fear and anxiety arousal state. But this is kind of those ideas that not only do you see it in your brain and EEG activity, you can see it in other physiological regions of the body. So this idea that attention, we only have this certain capacity or this resource that we can only handle a certain number or quantity or magnitude of environmental stimuli, right? And so you always hear this idea of people can't walk or chew gum at the same time, and this is the idea that something may be interfering with another. And that's really what we look at when we look at multitasking, and this is really where the idea that you can no longer text and drive a car, or you can't do certain things while doing something else, and that's because we see that one task is interfering with the other task. So that means that one task causes too much of your attention to go to it. So it's clogging up the capacity, the resource within your abilities to focus and gain attention. And so it removes something else. We call that an interfering task. And right, so it's that performance, speed, or quality of one component, or the main task is being removed or being buffered or being kind of a deterrent of completing the other task to the best of our ability, right? So this means that when one task is an interfering task on another, that means both tasks, some sort of that suffer, and so your performance decreases. And that's why we have these different rules and stuff where you can't do things. Now, right, like walking and chewing gum, neither one of the chewing gum doesn't take away from the task of walking, so it's not an interference task. So you have the capacity, the resource to walk and chew gum because they don't interfere with each other. So this interference is a measure of attention, and this is where you see in the bottom of the driving of the interference example is if neither task is diminished, then one of them is not attention demanding. Walking and chewing gum, the chewing gum doesn't require your attention. It's a reflexive or automatic kind of behavior of your chewing, where the walking maybe does, although at a certain point or when we start to walk, it doesn't take a lot of our attention either, right? So this interference criterion is a test that determines if one task requires attention, and typically you do this by creating a task, imposing that task, and seeing if the main task is diminished because of that including task. And if it causes diminishment of performance, then you call that new task an interfering task because it requires attention, and therefore it's imposing on that the capacity of your attention. So structural interference is a physical structure as a source of decrement, or neurological. So there's some sort of physical structure or neurological structure that's causing the interference. And then you have capacity interference, and that is not related to the physical structure, but it's more about the central capacity is overreached or received or approached, so therefore you have that decrement in performance. Now, I'm accused of this a lot, and and as we all have this ability to have selective attention, and it's the ability to consciously, or sometimes it's even subconscious, but sometimes it's to direct the attention to different inputs or tasks. And so you can do this with the intent to do it, or you can do it incidentally. And that's really how this is going to come in play. Sometimes we don't do this with intentional purpose, but sometimes we do have selective attention. And sometimes it's drawn to things that are more of our appeasing to us or appealing to us. Sometimes it's because we know we need to block some things out and go. And I will tell you, in my relationship with my partner, she's accused me of selective attention quite a bit, and yes, that is true, right? So sometimes, and really it's because of things, we're drawn to things that really hold importance or interest to us, and some things that don't hold interest to us or aren't more of our aesthetically pleasing concepts are not really what we focus on. And so oftentimes I'm guilty of this. I like a lot of action around me. So when I'm studying or I'm writing or I'm doing something, I oftentimes have a TV on or music on behind me. And it just kind of builds me up, and it's like a background thing, but I can selectively turn it out. It's just noise in the background for me oftentimes. And then it's the idea that we can look at things from the top down or bottom up, right? So we read from the top down. There's others that read, and we read from left to right, and there's other cultures that go bottom up or right to left. And the idea is that when you're reading or you're doing something, you can focus on the next thing that you need to be reading or focusing on, and you're able to eliminate and surround the rest of it with noise and take out. So you have that selective attention ability when you're reading or doing different things like playing music and reading. I don't read sheet music. I'm not a musician, but that's the same concept, right? You can go from section to section and being able to pay attention to what you need to at that time. And then the other thing is, though, that there is a kind of a limit to that selective attention, right? So if you were in some place and you hear, and oftentimes, you're doing something, you hear a loud boom or a loud noise in the background, and that takes away from your ability to selective attention, because it provides a stimuli that creates a response within your system that you don't have the ability to control. So oftentimes that is that. Now, if you grew up in an environment where gunshots and things like that were commonplace, and they would provide that kind of sudden boom idea or natural response in you that it would for somebody who didn't. Growing up in the neighborhoods where I grew up, my neighborhood was a good neighborhood, but 2 neighborhoods over from mine was not the best neighborhood to be in. And when I played a football game there, just down the road, there were some gunshots, right? And so many of us went running, and the people who grew up in that neighborhood just kind of hit the floor and ducked, because it's kind of a natural environment, or not a natural environment, but not as of a sudden boom or surprises to some of us. And so the question becomes, does attention have a fixed capacity, or is it not really a fixed capacity? And this comes into the idea where we bring in the filter theories. And the filter theories have gone through some changes over the years, as many theories do, as we get improvements in technology and study design and those type of things. They kind of go through a process. But the early studies believe that performance deteriorated when the fixed capacity was reached. So it really believed that there was just this fixed capacity and that you did things kind of in line with each other, and they were more in a series than they were in the ability to parallel process things. And in the signal channel theories, they saw this bottleneck which actually limited the information processing. So the signal theories believe more in a bottleneck. And then the early studies started to believe with the fixed capacity. But this is the idea, kind of a little bit of the filter theories and how it progressed along the ways. And what you're going to see is this line right here is kind of like a capacity reaching where you have all the lines prior before. This is called a parallel processing, right? And then what happens is all of a sudden you have to filter out some of the other ones and only focus on one. So there's this ability to focus for a period of time on multiple things, and then what you have to do is you have to do the filter concept, and you really have to kind of select which one you want to kind of look at, right? And this is the idea. There is a capacity, and then storage encoded in the perception analysis during that stimulus identification, and then you choose one to continue on, or you blend them all together to continue. So this idea of filter theories is at some level there is this ability to parallel process. And then you have to make some sort of conscious decision, and that's where this capacity reaching comes into play. And the idea is that as we've gone along, and this only goes up to 1973, but we feel that you can see how this has merged longer. And then, so if you look at this as a kind of a time in seconds kind of play here, you can see where this is shifted to the right. So we're able to process more in the parallel for a period of time. And so they're saying that our capacity is being reached. And this down here just says that the parallel processing, multiple things can be processed simultaneously. Oftentimes this is either incoming stimuli or incoming processes that we're looking at, and then at some point we just have to make a conscious decision and focus on the single one. So multiple resource theories is there's multiple pools with different capacities, and each of these different capacities has information processing demand on it, right? So each of these pools represents a different capacity and different processing demand. And that's really what it comes down to, right? Is our ability to information process this material and produce the desired outcomes in the motor behavior. Now we have the ability to be at different stages within the two tasks, right? So reading and playing music is really two things. Is I have to do the motor control to do it, but I'm also reading the thing. And then speech translation. Speech translation is one thing that has always impressed me, is the ability to listen to somebody speaking one language while taking it out and translating to somebody else in rapid time. I'm not bilingual, but this is something that I wish I was able to do. I should have been able to do growing in Southern California. But that ability to translate languages is this idea of multiple resource theories.